Welcome to the Experience Health Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Vassar, and today I am joined by Kris Rice, the founder of ChillPod, a luxury cold immersion system, here to speak on how cold therapy helps regulate the nervous system, reduce stress, and boost energy in only 2 minutes a day. This podcast will be especially powerful for women juggling a lot who need something that can work with limited time. So without further ado, Kris Rice, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Rachel. I'm excited for our conversation.
Absolutely, me too. So, diving right into it, can you share your personal story and journey on cold exposure and how you got into it and what drew you to it?
Of course, I'm happy to. So I resisted it for a long time. Let's just start with that.
Of
So
course, yeah.
usually everybody's reaction is like, no, I don't want to do that at all. And I was absolutely no different. So let's just start out normalizing that. But my journey really became I was alongside my daughter. I have two daughters that are basically teenage now. And when my older one was younger, she had a lot of mental health struggles. And
Mm.
so alongside supporting her and finding her more alternative or natural solutions, I really recognized my own need for those types of support too, for my own anxiety and really just to regulate my nervous system that had been very dysregulated for a very long time. And so I found a lot of things that I loved, practices that I still love today, meditation and movement and breath work and all of these things. However, it became this very big to-do list of things that I had to do in order to really help myself feel better, but there wasn't enough time in the day. So it became this very self-defeating situation. And so I have a good friend who is similar to me, where she's always curious about a new biohack, something to try, like is up for anything. And I'll do the same. I'll always try something once. So she was like, Kris, you seriously need to try cold plunging. And I was like, thanks, but no thanks, not going to happen. Like, I have no interest. And so we went back and forth like that for a couple of months. And then I was talking to her one day, and I think I was just in a space of feeling like, what do I have to lose? Like, what's the worst? Like, I feel like I do right now. And so it was from that space that I was like, okay, I hung up the phone with her. I literally looked up on Ace Hardware my like Rubbermaid trough that I bought. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go pick it up and I'm going to do it. I didn't even tell my husband because I was like, this is embarrassing. I might hate it and I don't know. And
You
so
might quit after the first time.
I know. I was like, if I don't hate it,
Yeah,
I'm at $100 and I can give like a
yeah.
farm the trough. So, um, but the bright side of it was I literally, the first time I did it, I was like, this is what I was missing. And so it was from that space of feeling my own relief, learning how to be able to go in the cold water and all that would come along with that, that I was like, I just want to get more women in cold water. I want to help more people be able to at least be curious about the practice
Yeah.
because I know how much it helped me and I'm always looking for ways to pay it forward.
Yeah, absolutely. When you first started cold plunging,
Mhm.
what were some of the most surprising things that you experienced or changes that you experienced?
The main thing that I remember when I first started was so like science will say that your dopamine can increase by up to 250%, right? And I was like, there's no way. That doesn't even seem possible. So I'm always one to try and like prove it wrong.
Yeah.
And I remember getting out of the tub and being like, I just feel so happy. Like I feel really good. And I would just have a smile on my face more often. And things just felt good. And I hadn't had that in a really long time. Like I almost can't remember when it was like that. And so that was the thing that I noticed was just, it literally felt like a reset. And I was like, okay, I feel good. I can go forward on my day from there. And that's really what sticks with me.
Yeah, that's definitely a really important one because that's something that many people struggle with
Yeah,
nowadays. They tend to get a lot of kind of like fake dopamine from social media
exactly.
and shows and stuff, and that does not make you feel good, especially like after you've been scrolling for a super long
Yeah,
time. You feel just like heavy and icky, you know what I mean?
totally.
Getting like healthy dose of actual dopamine is so good
Yeah.
for the body and definitely important for people nowadays because I know mental health difficulties like anxiety or depression is
Mhm.
very, very common. So that's super interesting that that was one of the most like stand out things that you noticed
Yeah.
with cold exposure for sure.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
Did you notice any like physical symptoms? What like either in like the first time or over time with cold water exposure?
Over time, I feel like, so I have always been one to do it in the morning. I'm just a morning person
Yeah.
anyway. So that was like the easiest time for me to do it. And so I'll oftentimes cold plunge, get my kids off to school, and then I will go work out however that's going to look for the day. And I remember being like, I physically feel stronger. And like for me, push-ups are like my least favorite thing to do. So I was like, huh, I would wonder how, like, am I actually stronger? Can I do more? And so I remember one day getting out and being like, I'm just going to do some push-ups and see how hard they are. And I could, like, it was night and day. I could absolutely do more with more ease. And so that just showed me that something was shifting physiologically, right?
Do you know what may have been caused or what had caused that increase in like strength and I guess like energy production could definitely go into it too?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know. I'll be honest, I don't know all of the science behind what is happening with that, but I think that it has to do with the blood flow. That was the first thing that came to my mind is like your veins are dilated in a different way when you've gone cold and then your body's starting to warm up. So that is my gut for why it relates to that strength element.
Yeah, that's definitely a super interesting concept. I think another thing that I've heard about cold water immersion is it can increase ATP production as well, which would obviously
Mm,
help with like workouts and strength and
yeah,
stuff like that if your body's able to produce more energy, which
sure.
definitely makes sense. Like long that would probably be more of a long-term benefit of cold exposure than like
Hmm.
short term because it could probably help improve the health of your cells
Yeah, for
too, which
sure.
would directly increase ATP production because your mitochondria
Hmm.
are healthier. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely how long did it kind of like did you say that was like the first time or using cold exposure or how long into using cold exposure did you test that?
I probably tested that a couple of months in,
Okay.
something like that. Yeah, it probably took a little while for that. The mood came first for me and
Yeah.
physical second, but I think everybody's so unique. Like I always think
Mhm.
my husband is like the exact opposite of me, where he would have kind of chronic back pain that he's like, I hold my stress there. Like that's exactly where it goes. And for him, when he goes in the water, he's like, it's my reset. Like I know that it'll flush it out and away it goes. And then I think he's had the mental benefits. We're like flip-flopped, is
Right
what I'm
after,
trying to
yeah.
say.
Well, that's probably because, like, for you, it seemed like the mental side of it was more prominent, and for
Yep,
him, the physical side seemed to be
totally.
prominent. So that definitely makes sense because
Yeah.
I feel like when the body is healing, it might target like the worst thing first.
What it needs first, for sure.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
so
it's like an order of priority.
yeah, so it's definitely not the same progression for everybody, but it kind of just depends on what they're specifically dealing with.
Yeah.
Do you have any certain like physical or health issues before you started cold water immersion that were kind of helped when you started it?
For me, it was really, I think, the anxiety
Yeah.
side and the nervous system piece of it. Because, my daughters were young-ish at the time, like that was like several years ago. That between raising a family, working full time, I had another business I was doing at the time, like all of those pieces I was maxed out. And
Yeah.
I don't think I could even feel that in my own body
Mm.
until I could feel it otherwise. So I didn't recognize how dysregulated my nervous system was until I could regulate it in the water and be like, oh, okay, now I can see when we go back and forth. So
Yeah,
for me, that was really the biggest struggle.
that makes sense. How would you say does cold therapy help regulate your nervous system?
So you probably already know this, but I'll give like the shortest science lesson on it. And that is, our nervous system has two ways of being. We're either in rest and digest and we're calm and relaxed, or we're in fight or flight. And so what I was experiencing at that time was just so many moments of fight or flight that like that was just it didn't take anything to tip me
Yeah.
into that constantly.
Yeah.
And
Any tiny
so
trigger just set you off.
yeah, like literally anything. The doorbell ringing can like do
Yeah.
that. So then the reason that cold immersion helps this is because we're intentionally putting our body in that stress,
Mhm.
but for a short time, for a finite amount of time, so that it can learn how to get back out of that in a safe and effective way. So once my body was literally like reprogrammed for how to respond to the stress, it was like it took that one moment in the cold plunge and then played that out in all areas of my life. So that's why you literally get a reset for your nervous system is you're intentionally putting it in fight or flight, but for a really short time. And then your body has the benefit of coming out of that. And that's where all of the resilience comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That definitely makes sense. I know for me, we kind of talked about this a little bit before the podcast. It's a little bit controversial as
Mhm.
to like what people should or like what types of people should be integrating cold exposure and
Yeah.
when. Like there are some people who are like people who are chronically stressed, constantly living in fight or flight, their cortisol
Mhm.
is super high, shouldn't do cold water immersion because that could push them over the edge. And then there's other
Right.
people, such as yourself, who say, like, no, like, I
Yeah.
was that type of person. And doing that actually helped me learn how to regulate my
Mhm.
nervous system. So, I mean, we can kind of go like two ways in this, kind of sharing like caveats, because I want people to know the
Yeah.
caveats on who shouldn't do cold water expo or cold water therapy,
Yeah.
but also give your thoughts
Of
on
course.
the caveats and the controversial ideas in this space.
Of course. Of course. I mean, to me, usually age comes into play, right? So if you are older and concerned about whether your heart can handle
Mm.
doing that, for sure, it's just a simple ask to your doctor. They know you, and always, if you have that nagging question in your mind, no matter what the circumstance, always ask.
Yeah.
And I also think to me, I think it's an opportunity to like pull away the perfectionism and the black and white thinking of like it has to look a certain way. There's so many different ways to explore it, even starting with like literally just a cold bowl of water and your hands in it, or, dunking your face for 10 seconds, and that's the thing. It could be 10 seconds and you've
Mm.
totally done that to be able to build up to it. I would never ever suggest somebody go and jump in absolutely freezing cold water and push themselves as far as they could. Like
Yeah.
no good will come from that. So I think some of the thinking around it's too much for your nervous system if it is fried is just starting in those really small
Yeah.
ways to be able to build up and that your body can adjust to it and you're not shocking it in a bad way, much like, saunas are a stress on our system too, but there's so much benefit to it.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I really
Yeah.
love that you mentioned like using a progression side of things.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of people when talking about cold exposure, they're like, you got to do full body immersion. They don't talk about the other things that people can do.
No.
But I kind of want to touch on like on the nervous system regulation side of things. One of the biggest reasons that people have dysregulated nervous systems when their body is constantly in fight or flight, they tend to become, and especially when anxiety is involved, they tend
Hmm.
to become disconnected from their bodies.
Mm.
There are a lot of like, you could say like more gentle ways to reconnect with your body, like
Yeah.
tapping or deep breathing or
Yeah.
progressive muscle relaxation, things like that.
Yeah.
Cold water therapy can be a really great way to help reconnect with your body because your body's like, hey, what's going on? And so I think what people start with really just depends on where they're at and what they feel like their body can do. If you
Yes.
feel like your body is just like super stressed, maybe you're dealing with a ton of inflammation, ton
Mhm.
of anxiety, where you feel like if you just like put your body in more fight or flight, it would just like
Yep.
spike your cortisol and potentially worsen
Yeah.
symptoms. I love that you said maybe just start with hands in some cold water or do like put your face in cold water. Another thing that I'll recommend to some of my clients who are starting cold water immersion is doing like cold hot showers to where
Hmm.
when you're taking a shower, you just turn the water to cold for like a few seconds or however
Yeah.
long you can manage, and then turn it back to warm, which again, not only can help you reconnect to your body, but then it doesn't activate the fight or flight stress response so much to where you pretty much just spend the rest of the day in fight or flight because you haven't learned how to regulate your nervous system again. But the
Yeah,
more you do that, the better you'll become in regulating your nervous system, and you'll be able to work up to the full body immersions. But again, there are also other people who can just go straight to full body immersions. Honestly,
sure.
I feel like the biggest thing in that is pretty much just like people's like mental state, if that makes sense. Like if people feel like they're not resilient, if they feel like they
Yes.
can't regulate their nervous system, if they feel like, what is the word that I'm trying to think of? Do you know like there's like certain types of people who just like feel like nothing, not that's not the right way I'm trying to say it. Kind of like
It's
feel
almost like a
like,
self-fulfilling prophecy where
yes,
you're like, I can't, well, it's what people say to
yeah,
me every
yeah.
time. I hate
Exactly,
cold
exactly.
water. And
Yeah,
then I'm like, well, no one likes it, but might you like how you could feel on the other side? Like maybe
yeah,
so. But
yeah,
I think you brought up such a good point, and it's one of my favorite ones to lean back to is the gift that it gives you to be able to connect with yourself.
yes,
Because the reality is, in that moment, it's no matter what you're doing, if you are doing your hands or you're doing a cold shower, you're brought to the present moment. You're
yeah.
very aware of what your body needs.
You
And
can't think about anything
you
else.
can't think about anything else.
That's
And
so cool.
it's
Yeah.
actually why I think that's a lot of why I love it, because that's what I
Yeah.
love about meditation, right? Like you're
Mhm.
literally with yourself and you have that super connected feeling. And to take that in a cold water, kind of just like shrink that experience. But I think that tuning into your body's own guidance is so important because when you do that, again, it's like you take that out of the water then. You're taking
Yeah.
that into all these other moments when you're like, "Oh, that's too much for me. Now I'm going to say no to that. This, I'm not feeling good about this. I'm going to stop that." It does absolutely trickle down. So it's almost like a little practice run for how you want to show up later.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think another thing that people should remember when doing cold water therapy, we're kind of like talking about the caveats on like what people should like do and what will be good for their body.
Yeah.
Just understand cold water is not going to be comfortable while you're doing it. You are absolutely not going to be comfortable. It's going to
Yeah.
activate the fight or flight state. So if you're trying to test your tolerance, I would test how you're feeling after, like the day
Hmm.
after, maybe a couple days after if you don't do it every single day. And if you feel like you are more regulated, more happy, maybe you have less pain,
Hmm.
more energy, then I would
Hmm.
say continue doing that because your body is reaping the benefits. If you feel
Yeah.
more stressed, more inflamed, more dysregulated, then I would either go to like practices like deep breathing or meditation or tapping or something like that
Hmm.
that's less intense to
Hmm.
help learn how to regulate your nervous system first, and then you can progress into the cold exposure once you feel like you're able to regulate yourself a little bit more. I think those are good caveats for people,
Yeah.
just because I really want to make sure that people understand what to do for their own health while
Yeah.
having the tools or while knowing the tools to help support their health and implement them properly. So, would you agree that that would be a good kind of like guide to help people learn when they can implement cold water therapy?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to go. And you've mentioned tapping a couple times, which is literally one of my very favorite things. And I mean, I think you could even lean into that. I never personally did this, but like tap on the fear of it. Tap on the fear that you have of going into there. And then, to just kind of regulate yourself before you go in. I think that that step of regulating yourself before it is really important. And I think the whole thing we're saying is like pay attention to your body's needs and start really small and progress up from there. Like we're both saying the same thing on that. And I think there's so many ways that you can play with that, whether it's in how you're experiencing the water or if you are going in and you have the ability to control the temp, anything from 40 to 60 degrees is technically cold therapy. So that's a really wide range. I think, we're fed the message of like floating ice all around you.
Yeah,
I don't do that.
the Instagram videos that go viral. Yeah.
Yeah. So like that's pretty in a picture. That's not real life. That's not what you have to do. I will say I was actually listening to a Mel Robbins podcast this week, and she had a doctor on there who I had never heard a doctor say this before, but I thought it was really interesting and might support you and your audience too. And that is, she was saying specifically for women, the higher temperature is actually better. So our bodies actually will respond at like the peak performance or the peak goals that you're trying to get from cold immersion if you go at more of that 55 temperature
Interesting.
versus
Yeah.
men tend to be, they can do 40s and that really serves them. But that's like an extra stress on women's bodies for a whole variety of reasons.
Yeah.
But I thought it was really interesting because never have I've heard different times, I've heard,
Yeah.
all different ways to think about it, but never have I heard specifically women think
Yeah.
about bumping up that temperature. And I think that
Mhm.
makes it really accessible too, of like, that's
Yeah.
definitely a cold shower. Like you could do that and you don't have to make it any fancier than that. You can just go about that way and see if it serves you.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I feel
I
like
thought
that
so
would
too.
probably make people more intrigued to do it because
Right?
they don't have to do it in like -20 water
Totally.
like they do.
Totally. And full
Um,
transparency, that's how I started it too. I mean, I
yeah,
just used my hose water. I had no way
yeah,
to cool it down other than like literally the water that was coming out of it. So it was like probably mid 60s the first time I did it. And then, I learned how to make it colder and all of that. But there's no shame in starting at a higher temperature, and for not very long, you're still doing it.
yeah, absolutely. Kind of on the same lines of like the differences between women and men and their responses to cold water therapy.
Yeah.
Is there any specific like recommendations that they give to help women utilize cold therapy properly around their cycle?
Mm-hmm. Oh, there is, and that's a good reminder to me to go dig into that. Full transparency, I have an IUD, so I don't really know the difference anymore. And so I wish I did do that personally for myself. That's a great question. Um, I want to say at the phase when your body is just craving more rest and wanting to slow down, obviously those are not the times to lean into cold therapy. That's the time to just let your body rest, let it be. And then in those, fluctuations when you have the higher energy naturally,
Mhm.
that would be when you'd want to lean into it to just kind of extra lift that. But you don't want to add tax when your body is already like feeling depleted.
Yeah.
That's never the time to add something.
Absolutely. So if women feel like it's important for them, kind of just like following the normal cycle syncing
Yeah,
trends of like
exactly.
workouts and food and stuff like that.
Yep, I totally
Yeah.
agree.
I think that's not something that every woman has to follow either. It kind of
Right.
depends on how their cycle is, how their hormones are, how they
Hmm.
feel around their cycle. Cycle syncing is like super popular nowadays. I don't think
It
every
really is.
single
Yep.
person needs to integrate it, but I do
Hmm.
think that it's really important for people who do have like hormonal imbalances or
Yep.
PCOS or difficult symptoms, especially around their periods. So I think that's another important consideration because
Yeah.
if someone gets like super cold during their menstrual cycle, that could probably make symptoms not very fun.
Yeah. No.
Potentially. Not for everyone, but potentially for some people, just because it gets so cold and you typically want more warmth
Yeah,
in
for
that
sure.
time. So, yeah, that's super
Yeah,
interesting.
it's that leaning into your own
Yes,
body's needs, right?
exactly.
Like just tuning into today, even not even in like a week span, just today, does that feel right? No. Great. I'll not do it today and I'll listen to my body tomorrow?
Yeah, absolutely. How do you personally implement cold therapy? Do you just do it every single day, or what do you do?
I don't. I don't.
Okay.
I do it a handful of times per week. I
Oh,
remember reading at one point in time, and I really liked this guidance of a goal of 11 minutes in the week. So,
okay.
however you kind of want to mix and match that timing to make it work. I think that, we sometimes lose that act of playfulness and just like seeing what works and just having like a curious mindset around it. So, like, I say that because literally the other day, I I was having some photos taken of me while I was doing it, so I had to get in and out of it. But I had to get in and out for probably a minute and then get out a minute. So I did it 3 times. And afterwards, I was like, I feel different than I normally do when I would do 3 minutes just sitting in here. So I was like, it's such a good reminder to just play around with it.
Yeah.
Um, but for me, I lean into the morning again because I'm a morning person, but also there's a lot of science behind it reinforcing your circadian rhythm and all of those reasons to
Absolutely, yeah.
boost up your energy for the day ahead. Um,
Knowing the natural like cortisol pattern, I would
yes.
probably say try to do it in the morning for sure. Because if you're spiking your cortisol and your stress hormones in the evening,
Yeah.
that could definitely negatively impact your sleep. So I would
Yeah.
definitely try to incorporate it in the morning if possible.
I totally agree. And my hack on that is like I go from pajamas to swimsuit, so I don't put on clothes in between because I'm like, if I do that, it's never gonna happen.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I do it probably, I'd say I aim for about 4 times a
Four
week. And
times.
I really just kind of listen to, is today that day? No, today I didn't. And then yesterday I did. So,
Yeah.
we'll see what tomorrow brings.
Yeah, absolutely. How long, like let's say for most effectiveness, optimal timing's sake, how long
Mhm.
should people be doing cold exposure for? And is there like a cap to where the benefits start to decline? Because most things run in a bell curve. So I'm
Totally.
curious what that time is.
I think that that is super duper individual.
Yeah.
So, I have never heard a real exact time frame. I've always
Okay.
heard between about 30 seconds and 2.5 minutes is sort of that sweet spot.
Hmm.
But I really think that it's up to you. You've like the two gauges to play with. You've got temperature and you've got time. And
Yeah.
so it's really important to just listen to those cues that your body is giving you. I would like to set a max. I would never try and go for more than a couple minutes the first time you're doing it by any means. You know,
That one would be hard anyway, so I don't
I
think
think it
anyone's
would be,
struggling with too much
yes.
time.
I don't think it would be easy, but I'm just
Like,
putting it
oh
out
man,
there
that
for
was just too
somebody
long.
who's somebody's like hardcore. They're like, I'll
Yeah.
definitely do it for 5 minutes. Like, don't be a hero. You don't need to do that.
Oh my gosh, that'd be funny. So like if it's a little bit warmer, like around the 60 time, then you could
Yeah.
probably go a little bit longer. And then
Yes.
if it's like super cold, probably making sure that you don't go more than like what, like 2 minutes,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah. So if you're using me as an example, which we can do, when I started out doing it at like about probably, 55 to 60 degrees, I personally could actually make it a lot longer than I expected. So I could do it for 5 minutes plus. I was also sitting in the sunshine, so it was nice weather at the time, like all of those things. So I was able to do that. But as soon as it got into the 40s, I was at like a 2 minute max. I feel like 50 is really that threshold where my body was like, oh, this is like a very different experience than it was in the 50s. But again, everybody's going to have their own kind of experience with that. But I think listening to your body's cues, feet and hands are just the most sensitive. So if you have like circulation challenges, things like that, I keep my hands out because I I will not feel my hands for a very long time. And I'm like, not that doesn't feel like the right thing to me. So
Yeah.
I keep them out. My feet stay cold a long time,
Hmm.
but they're always my gauge for if I went too far. Like if
Yeah.
I stay in a little too long and I'm like, ooh, my feet are really cold for like a couple hours, that's always a cue to be like, maybe that day we went a little too long.
Yeah. Are there any of your favorite like post cold therapy practices, maybe to help like warm you up, or what do you typically do after you
Yeah.
get cold exposure?
So, I mean, I usually jump out and like finish giving my kids breakfast and then away we go. So it's very much like in and out.
Yeah.
If I was being really intentional about it, I think that just like gentle stretching, kind of like moving yourself around just to get your blood flowing and all of that would be really, that would feel nice. I think anything just kind of even like jumping around a little bit, just kind of getting yourself warmed a little bit naturally. The key is definitely to not warm yourself by like jumping in a hot shower or something
That
like
was
that
going to be my
because you
question. Yeah.
essentially are just wiping out everything you just did.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
So don't jump in a hot shower.
no,
What do you think with that? What do you think of like hot to cold exposure therapy where people switch from hot to cold over and over like
yeah.
a few
I
times?
mean, I think it's great. I think that, but always start hot and then
Okay.
go cold. Um, I find for myself, I get like, the biggest bang for my buck if I go all in on hot and then I go cold. Whereas sometimes I've gone to different sauna places that'll be like, go hot and then cold. But that second rotation never feels quite right to me. It never quite
Mm.
feels the same. So that's just me personally. But I think the more you can heat your body to one extreme, then you go to the other extreme. Like
Yeah.
you've done it all then.
Okay, that makes sense. We have this like it's called like the Nordic Spa. I live in
Yeah.
Alaska.
Yeah.
And it has like cold water immersion therapy, and then it has like a bunch of saunas, a bunch of
Yeah.
hot tubs and different stuff like that.
Yeah.
So pretty much what you do when you're there, you most people start with the hot, obviously, and
Yep.
we'll go to the cold, and then we
Uh-huh.
just switch back and forth for like hours.
Oh my gosh.
Most of the time I'm in the hot though, but we'll do like typically people will do like a few things of cold, which I thought
Wow.
was funny. Because of what you said, you're like, I typically don't jump back and forth, but when like everyone
That's
does it
fine.
at the
Again,
spa, I
to
just
each
like, feel
person.
good afterwards.
Yeah.
And I don't usually end on the cold though. I usually end with like a warm
That's
bath
fair.
because I'm not trying to like stay
Yeah.
cold because it's Alaska and we're
Yeah.
outside. But yeah, what are your thoughts on like those type of spas where people just go back and forth a lot?
I think it's awesome. I mean, that's the point is just shifting gears for your body and
Yeah,
sending it in one direction and then having it figure out the other. So I think it's great. I think it's
yeah.
wonderful. And again, it's listening to yourself to be like, okay, I have reached my point of hot. I need to get out. And then I know a lot of times, I'm curious if you do it. I've heard a lot of times in those Nordic exposures, it'll be actual like go all the way under the water so your head is fully
That's
like
what is like
yeah,
recommended. I typically don't like getting my hair wet though.
ditto.
Uh,
Ditto.
I don't, but
Yeah.
most people do.
I feel like that's the bonus of cold plunging because you
Yeah.
can like get your moment in, but you don't have to actually like do your hair again or anything
Yeah.
like that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm with you on that. But a lot of people, I've heard others say if you do the full, like really intense sauna, you actually should go underwater so that you literally clear it out entirely.
Yeah. I feel like that would be
That,
really helpful for like cognitive function too, like
yeah,
fog and stuff. But I don't
yeah,
like my hair's too hard. Freaking
yeah.
long. So long.
Sounds like too much.
Maybe next time I go, I'll
Yeah,
just like
let me
go on
know.
a bad hair day and not care.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's definitely probably not something I would recommend people do like all the time because the spa is
No.
super expensive. So I go like a few times a year because I
Yeah.
love it. But I feel like if you're planning on doing it like long term and you want to utilize the hot and the cold therapy, probably just doing like the sauna or like hot tub or whatever, and then
Hmm.
going into the cold water and then just calling it at that.
Yeah.
As you mentioned before, would be a good thing for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I
Absolutely.
agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's any other questions that I have about cold plunging. Is there anything that you want to leave women with when it comes to helping them regulate their nervous system and integrating cold plunging?
I mean, I would just encourage anyone to, for a second, like put aside the distaste and the hatred towards the cold and to instead like connect to what your why could be on the other side of that. So I think that's a really powerful way to just approach something that
Mhm.
is uncomfortable and not desirable is just to think what, like if you could wave a magic wand and what could you have on the other side of it? You know, if the more you connect to that, I really believe there's a connection then for you as you try it. And then that can really start to play out. So just open your mind to those possibilities and you might be really surprised by what can come through.
Absolutely. Growth comes through discomfort.
Indeed.
It was amazing talking with you today, Chris.
Thank you.
I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, you too. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye.